computer. There's screen. There we go. All right. All right, so I call it the nervous system because that's what it is. And it's got to do with nerves and many other parts. So I won't worry about the background picture, but this is just to let someone who's just coming in to know what it's about. So our nervous system has got many parts, and within each part there are many parts. And as it's very complex, and I try to minimize it as much as and still make it hopefully interesting. So what have we got with the nervous system? We've got the brain. So inside this casing here, there's a spinal cord, which is from the base of the brain down to just above your bum. We have sensory organs, eyes, ears, tongue, skin, lots of sensory aspects inside us, which most people have no idea about. The sense our temperature, our oxygen levels, many other things. And of course, we have the nerves that send signals right through the whole body. And without the nervous system, we'd have no control, we'd have no regulation, and it's the way of communicating from one part of the body to the other. And if it works beautifully, everything's good. Even if one part of it is a problem, then you've got a problem. And it also allows, we have voluntary and involuntary control. The voluntary control allows us to do things. I'm talking, I'm moving my hands as I normally do, I'm speaking as I normally do. And some of you are drinking and swallowing, so you can do that. And of course, learning. That's why you're here. The involuntary part, you have no control over. Things like breathing. You can hold it for a short time, but the system will override your holding your breath. Digestion is controlled, blood pressure, waste removal, all those things that we do. And even if there's an emergency, you may have been, say in a car, you're driving along and all of a sudden the car in front of you stops really fast and you're coming up close. You will feel it inside you instantly that there's something happening, and you press on the brake and you go through the motions, but your body is feeling, it's controlling it, and it's also feeling your blood pressure changes. If it keeps up, something else happens, your mouth goes dry, all sorts of things happen. It's all under control. And so all mental activity is centered in the brain. And this is something that you can't actually find where it is, but our thinking, our learning, our memory, it's all there. And don't forget, we also have an endocrine system. They're the hormones, and they work together with the nervous system in maintaining the maintenance of the body, the regulation of all aspects of it, and we maintain the most important thing, homeostasis, where everything same stasis is conditioned, is static. So our body is constant. We sit up, we stand, lie down, we walk. Whatever we do, everything is rearranged, and through the nervous system and through the endocrine system. Now, the actual of the nervous system, so the brain and spinal cord. Now, the sensory organs, for example, in our skin, you think, oh, we can feel things. But have you ever thought of what you can actually feel? You can feel touch. You can feel temperature. You can feel very, very gentle touch. You can feel pressure. if you walk into a, your elbow walks into a door or something, that hurts. You feel that as well. And they're all different, and different parts of the skin, there are different layers within the skin, have different senses. I'll leave it for another talk. And of course, you've got the nerves. And as far as sensory organs, we also have lots of others within the body, even ones that measure our blood pressure. So this, the whole system is a controlling system, it's a regulatory system, and it's a communication system. And it works really, really, really well. So as far as voluntary things, we can move. I'm speaking, I can do all sorts of things, as all of you can, but there's lots of involuntary. We can breathe, and we don't have to worry about it. We don't need a machine to control it. You've had breakfast, I hope. Get your blood sugar levels up a bit. And the whole digestive process, as soon as you swallow, it's out of your control. Blood pressure, you just take for granted. Waste removal, so you go to the toilet regularly. And what I mentioned before about the reaction in emergencies. So we have all this mental activity. And some of that's a repeat from the previous slide. I have to check that out. Okay, now, this is how the nervous system is subdivided. We have a central system, which is in the brain. We have the peripheral system everywhere else. Within the brain, we have a spinal cord. That's the one that goes down the back. We have a brain stem and the brain. The brain stem is the link between the back of the brain, the bottom, and the spinal cord. And the peripheral nervous system, we have the autonomic, and it's a bit, sounds a bit like automatic, and it is automatic. It's called the autonomic, and it controls our heart rate, how the eyes work, digestion, respiration. And then the somatic, it comes up. So the autonomic really is information leaving the brain, and the somatic is information coming into the brain. And so wherever you are, if I say put your arm up somewhere where you can't see it, the brain knows exactly where it is. You just know. Now, the autonomic system has also two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system, a bit more detail later, is really the automatic aspects of it, and what we call fight and flight, the reactions of stress. The parasympathetic it calms the body down, and it controls energy usage in the body. So neurons, there are many parts within that. So each neuron, a neuron is a cell, one cell. It could be absolutely tiny, or it could be the length of your body, up from that brain to your bum, virtually the spinal cord. So each cell has got a nucleus, and of course, and it produces, is a cell body of a neuron, and it produces neurotransmitters. So chemicals that transmit information through the nerves. That's what that is. It also has dendrites, and these receive signals from other neurons because they talk to each other all the time. And it also receives information from dendrites, so the tips of the nerves, from sensory organs. So our skin, for example, is just full of dendrites. As I said, for touch, for pain, for temperature, and each one's different. Axons they're the long bits in between, and that's where the message moves down and to synapses. And a synapse is the link from one nerve to the next. More detail later. A myelin sheath, it's a protection process, but also if you think about an electric cable, you may have a piece of copper surrounded by plastic. The reason for that, of course, is you don't want leakage and you don't want someone touching the copper bit and getting affected. Same thing here. The myelin is a fatty tissue. It's a very special cell, and it protects the axons. And it's got a whitish color. So if you look at, if you ever seen nerves, you see that sort of a slightly yellowish, white, very light, pale in color. Now, the synapses, there they are, they're the gaps. So there are actual gaps between nerves and what are called effectors, the things that the nerves send messages to. So this is a basic diagram of a nerve. So here we have a cell body. Of them, you've got all these little bits that come in, and they're the bits that collect the information. They're called dendrites. The dendrites, that each of these little bits could be connected to other nerves, especially in the brain. It's very complex because of that. And then down the other end, we have the end of the axon. Now, the axon is the bit that goes through. And this is where the messages go, and the little terminal bits here attach to other nerves or other things like muscles or organs, let's say endocrine organs which produce hormones. So imagine the equivalent of these little ends here on this end, but to other nerves. The myelin sheath is this. Now, each of these little bubbles here is one cell. And when the nerve develops, a myelin cell, one cell comes along and starts to grow around. It wraps itself around. And each one of those is like that. And between each one of those is a tiny gap. So the message comes from there to here, and then from there it goes on. And where there's a gap, there's a little jump. This diagram doesn't show the gap. Now, inside the cell, inside the nerve cell, is a slightly different sort of diagram. It has it's like any other cell in the body. It's got a cell body. Inside that, we've got a nucleus, we've got mitochondria, little things which produce energy. We've got endoplasmic reticulum, which there's smooth and rough, if you see here. The rough endoplasmic reticulum produces proteins, and the smooth produces other molecules which are not proteins, like fats and sugars. Now, this is very, very important, because if we go back one, a message gets sent down the axon. Now, down the base here, these terminals, the molecules that are made here travel down and are stored there. So when a signal goes from here to the next cell, some of those molecules, like messenger molecules, if you like, leave this and go through a little gap to the next one. So it's all made in here and it travels down. It's got mitochondria, as you can see here, so there are energy requirements down there. The dendrites what they do is, it's from the Greek dendron, tree. The short, highly branched extensions of the nucleus, and you can see here they're called down the bottom dendritic branches. That's the dendrite. So that's the cell body. They've got the endoplasmic reticulum, got the mitochondria, everything's in there like a normal cell. It's got a nucleus, but all these bits here, and these are the bits that collect the information. There's the axon, it's not showing the myelin sheath, and then it connects to other cells. It's a bit repetitive, but I try to find different diagrams which might give you a better idea. Your brain should be putting the whole lot together and getting an overall picture. And there is these dendrites, these guys here, they're receiving incoming information from other cells, from other organs, and they carry to the nucleus and then further on. So the axon then, it carries signals from the nucleus to the end plate. Now the end plate is these little bits. It's called a plate because it's almost flat. You'll see shortly. Anyway, so that's what they do. Now there are two types of signals that they have. They have chemical signals and electrical signals in us. Now the chemical signals are the neurotransmitters. They're the ones that cross over the little gap. That gap is called a synapse, and they move, so the end plate through the axon where they accumulate. So they're made in the cell itself, and they accumulate, as I showed you, down the bottom or the end. They're also electrical signals, and they are brought to the cell by the dendrites. So where the dendrites get messages in, it goes straight down these little very special extensions of the cell, and they get electrical signals coming through and along the cell membrane. From there, along the cell membrane of the axon. So they go past the nucleus, past the cell body to the axon. That's the long bit. That's the electrical bit. So when the electrical signals reach the end plate, that's the end, and these neurotransmitters, they're released into the synapse. I show you diagrams. I was in a quandary. Do I show you the diagram first and then explain, but without the diagram there, or explain first and then I can use the words for you to see on the diagram? Now, the neurotransmitters move very rapidly across these tiny gaps and to the effector organ. Now, the effector organ, it effects a signal, and what it does, it does something. So I'm talking, so all these signals are coming into my head, my mouth area. So it's controlling my lungs, so I can breathe. It's controlling my lungs, my diaphragm, and my jaw, my tongue. So that's the action. The stronger the electrical signal is, and the longer it lasts, the more neurotransmitters are released. So I'm releasing these all the time. So this is the end bit. Here's the tip of the axon, and this is the end plate. And these little things here are the mitochondria. Now these vesicles here have the neurotransmitter in them, and they are made back in the nucleus, and they come down the axon. And by the way, the axon could be really short, like a millimeter or so, or a little bit more, or could be very long, so from the hip down to the foot. So it varies. These vesicles here come and towards this transporter, if you like. It matches up, you end up with this, and the neurotransmitter moves through the synapse, which is this gap between diagram, between the end plate and the next neuron. And the neuron has got receptors specific for that particular neurotransmitter. And that sends a signal down this second nerve, the second neuron, and then moves up from there. So the neurotransmitters, now listen, I said to you right at the beginning, this could get a little bit on the complicated side. So if you're having problems, just let me know and I'll go back and explain. So there are two types, depending on what their actions are. Now, some of the neurotransmitters are excitatory. They encourage the brain to fire signals. Others are inhibitory. They stop actions happening and help the brain turn these actions off. And but you need both. You can't have an excitation all the time or inhibitory all the time. So you have to have some mechanism of control. So, and it's a very, very fine control. Our system is amazingly fine. So there are many, many neurotransmitters, and there are 7 major ones. There are others, of course. Now, I'm sure you've heard of some of these transmitters, neurotransmitters. Now, one's called acetylcholine, and this was the very first one to be discovered. And it's a small molecule that works in muscles mostly. It has some role in the brain, including helping direct attention. So, for example, if you're driving, you need to concentrate on what you're doing. And if your brain starts to wander a little bit, these acetylcholine is released in the brain to get your attention back. It's a bit harder if you're sleepy or tired, or if you're reading a book and you're slowly falling asleep. If you want to finish reading, this will help you getting back into what you were doing. And also, it directs attention and plays a key role in facilitating neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is if something happens in the brain, other parts will replace that function. That's probably the simplest way of saying it. There's a second one called dopamine, and that's the pleasure chemical. So it's a rewarding thing for some sort of behavior. So the food. So if you do something amazing, and you can have food, you can have drugs, you can have sex, whatever it is, and that dopamine, it gives you this amazing, while you're having the food or the sex or the drugs, will give you, and I'm not talking about aspirin or that sort of drug, it gives you a sense of well-being and happiness. And it's one of the most extensively studied neurochemicals because it's so important in human behavior and also cognition. Cognition is workings of the brain. Dopamine, it's involved in motivation. You have motivation to do things so you can be rewarded. Movement, reward processing, attention, working memory. And without it, we will not remember anything. And of course, learning. So dopamine is just so important. And it's probably one that you've heard of before. And it's not just a pleasure chemical. This is just new. It also suggests that it plays an important part in Parkinson's disease. addiction, schizophrenia, and other neuropsychiatric disorders. And so there's a lot of work around the world going into that aspect about controlling it a bit. Another one is called glutamate, and it's an excitatory neurotransmitter in the cortex. Now, the cortex is the outside layer of the brain, and it brings on excitement. It's glutamate, and it's important to learning and memory. So, while you're learning, like now, if you're really happy learning something, it makes you feel good and makes you want to do more. And of course, it goes involved in the memory of what you're learning. It's got long-term potentiation. So that means it's whatever it's doing is a long-term situation. The molecular process is believed to help form memories. So, someone tells you something. How do you remember what was said? How do you remember what you did yesterday? Or how do you remember your shopping list? Okay, so this hormone, the neurotransmitter, is really important in that sort of area, and it works in what's called hippocampus and the cortex. So, in fact, it occurs in very specific neurons, and they're called glutamatergic. Glutamatic. I don't have any trouble with this one. Glutamatergic neurons. When I was at university, that word wasn't there. Serotonin is another one. You've probably heard of that. It's also called 5-HT, and it's called the calming chemical. Okay, this is excitatory, this is calming, and it's really involved in mood modulation. So if you get too excited, it will bring you down. If you're feeling a little bit on the depressed side, serotonin will bring you up. A lack of this hormone, it's been linked to depression, because if people feel a bit depressed and you've got the serotonin normally, it'll bring you up again. But if you're lacking serotonin or enough of it, you can go into this deep depression and other neuropsychiatric conditions. 5-HT is also has been implicated in managing appetite, sleep, memory, and decision-making behaviors, and that's really recent. So you've got, we are a whole bunch of chemicals, and these hormones, these molecules are really so important, and we don't even think about it, they just do it. So, you're making decisions all day, whatever they are. Will I have lunch now or in half an hour? That's a decision. And norepinephrine, it's also called noradrenaline, and it's both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. And noradrenaline, if you like, either word is good. It's linked to mood, arousal, vigilance, memory, and stress. So you've heard of adrenaline. This is a modified version of adrenaline called noradrenaline. And new research is looking at both traumatic stress disorder and Parkinson's, and how does norepinephrine or noradrenaline is affecting those things. I'm sure you've heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, and you've heard of Parkinson's. There are two others, oxytocin and vasopressin. And they are neurochemicals and they're neurotransmitters. and recently classified, by the way. And they are made in the hypothalamus, and they're released from there. And the hypothalamus, by the way, it's about the size of a pea, and it's in the brain. So imagine if you had two knitting needles, the one through between the eyes and one from the temple, and where the two meet. That's where they are. As I said, it's tiny little. It's made up of two parts, anterior and posterior, and it's the master control of hormones. It's below hypothalamus, is under the thalamus. The thalamus is above that, and that controls it. So they act directly on neurons. Okay, so these things, these two here, and they've been linked to pair bond formation, monogamous behavior, and drug addiction. I can't tell you how they do it, but they're involved. So it's important for people to pair bond. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist. It's important. People want to be with people, animals generally, and with humans, monogamous behaviors. And that's fairly recent, by the way. Two other hormones, estrogen and testosterone, also can work as neurotransmitters and they influence synaptic activity. So, these are the two sex hormones. And don't think that only females make estrogen and only males make testosterone. All of us make both, but in different concentration levels. Now, all right, let's look at the myelin sheath. This is a fatty cell, I mentioned to you, wraps itself around the axon so that the electric charge that goes down the axon isn't leaked away, isn't lost from the axon. So it's composed of very special fatty cells called Schwann cells. And they wrap themselves around the axon, so they get layered. And they're living cells, but they're wrapped around the axons. It's not so. This sheath is not continuous. So you have, I'll show you diagrams, but you have one and another, and there's a gap between them. And so so between two Schwann cells, which are mature ones, the ones that are wrapped around, there's a gap, and it's called the node of Ranvier. And when the signal coming down the axon gets to the node of Ranvier, it can't go through the axon. It sort of jumps. So it helps with the speed of the movement of the signal. And it just jumps across these nodes.
Mm.
So the electrical signal, a healthy nerve, I don't know if you can imagine it, but it travels at around 400 kilometers an hour.
Gosh, how did they work that out?
Oh, very easy. I had problems. I was having pins and needles in my leg for a while. So the doctor sent me to a neurologist, Cabrini, and he put two. It was my left leg, so on my left leg near my foot, and I can't remember if it was above the knee or below the knee, but he put two electrodes and he sent signals down there. He knew the distance, and the machine measured the time it took to travel that distance.
Mm.
And I think it got something like 380 kilometers an hour. So my leg was fine, and eventually the pins and needles disappeared. So we don't know what happened. It didn't hurt. I could do everything. I could walk, and I don't know. Okay, but that speed, that's how we can do things so quickly. And in fact, reflexes happen before you even know it happened consciously. So if you disrupt the myelin, the sheath, you get leakage.
Mm.
So, example, in multiple sclerosis, the speed drops to about 4 kilometers,
Wow.
and that's not fast enough to get things going. So the signal get so there's not enough signal for the muscles to move, and so people with MS really have a problem. So here's the diagram of a Schwann cell. Now, this is the blue bit here is the Schwann cell when it's finished. So this is where it starts. There's the nucleus of the Schwann cell, and it anchors one bit, and then the rest just grows and goes around and around and keep going. I don't remember how many times, and you end up with this fatty layer. The living cell, normal, so it's got its own nucleus. It's got the sheath there. It's got the axon running through it like this. Okay, and it supports the movement of the message down the axon. Now, this is in the external, away from the brain. In the brain, it doesn't have these. It works in a different way. So this is what it would look like. We have these Schwann cells, or they're called myelin.
Where does the Schwann name comes from? Is it called after somebody?
Yeah, after somebody.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's okay.
A bit of research for you, if you like. Probably
Okay.
someone, a German name with a name like that probably would be, or Austrian.
Yeah.
Maybe discover how it works. So here's the cell body, the dendrites, the axon through there, and the terminals down the bottom, the neuron, so that's that whole thing is called a neuron. Here's another one, a different version of the diagram. Again, here you can see the circular bit. It goes through. Then here you've got these gaps, node of Ranvier, and you get the jumping through. Message from here, normal cell, the nerve cell comes through down to the end, and this is called the end plate. Down here, if you look at that, the gray bit, that is a muscle, a striated muscle. You can see the striations in it. And this is just as part of an example. So there's a muscle that we have some control over, and then from the signal that comes from here and to this axon, to this nerve body, cell body from higher up, goes to the muscle and then signals the muscle does whatever it wants. So I like this one. As I mentioned before, when a signal goes through the axon there, it moves very, very quickly between one node of Ranvier to the other, but then it hops over, and so that gives you this very rapid transportation, as you see here, about 400 km. But if something happens in the system where the Schwann cells start breaking down, and so it's called demyelination, where you lose the insulating capacity of that nerve. And so what happens, instead of moving through really quickly at about 400 kilometers an hour, bits of it are missing, and so the nerve is damaged and it moves at about 4 kilometers an hour, as I said before. And this is actually what it looks like. This is a healthy one on the left, and the bottom one is for some reason they're calling it scarred, but it's not working. So people in that situation do have problems especially with movements. Now we have this thing called a reflex. A reflex is there to save you from something. So, for example, if someone throws a ball and it's heading to your head, you don't wait long. You just put something up to catch it or stop it. That's a reflex. If you've been to a doctor and he taps on below your kneecap and your leg goes up and back, that's a reflex. And I'll try to explain. So we have this thing called it's automatic thing, but the process is called a reflex arc. So that, well, it's where it happens. So if you, I gave an example here, if you accidentally touch something really hot, your hand moves away before you even realize that it's hot. It's everything that reflex arcs do is to protect the body. So I'm sure we've all experienced the hot object and moving away. Then you feel the heat in the fingers, but your hand is not getting burnt. And the simplest of these reflex arcs only needs two kind of nerve cells, and what's called a sensory neuron. That's a neuron that senses something, which receives information like light, pressure, sound, and the motor neuron, the thing that moves them, gets the muscle to move. So the motor neuron then passes signal onto the effector cell. So I said, if you touch something hot, the sensory neurons send a message and the motor neurons are the ones that actually move the muscle. Okay, different signals, and the effector cell is the thing that the muscle in this case. So it could be a muscle or a gland. For example, I don't know, if you're walking down the street and this great big dog jumps out at you from on a leash, hopefully, it's massive thing, starts barking, you can feel your heart racing instantly. It's a sort of a flight type reaction. So we have this response of an effector cell, it's a muscle or gland. So, for example, if you touch, this is a little cactus, I think. So if you touch the cactus and a little prickle touches your index finger, a signal moves down the arm, right, to the spinal cord. And there it goes in two ways. One, it goes, where are we? It goes down and into the motor nerve to the muscle, which is the effector organ, and it moves the finger away, the hand away. At the same time, a little bit more slowly, it also sends a signal up to the brain to tell the brain what's happening. But this one is much faster than this one. So you move your hand before the brain even knows you're doing it. And this is called a reflex arc. Here's a standard one. The doctor has this little hammer and he taps below the kneecap. And what happens there is, by tapping below the kneecap is actually in some connective tissue attached to this great big muscle. And when you tap in, it actually stretches the muscle. Now, the muscle does not like being stretched. So it does the opposite. It reacts and gets shorter. So the leg moves up. That's a reflex. So here we have the signal from the muscle going, it's a motor neuron there, it goes into the spinal cord, and then goes here, back here. Number 3 moves here to contract it. But you can't contract this muscle without relaxing the one underneath it. They can't both contract at the same time, or you break the bone, like what happens when someone's got tetanus. So this contracts, this relaxes, and the leg moves up. In the spinal cord, and the signal, as I said, also goes back to the brain. I just go back a titch. Here, this green there is called the interneuron. The word's not there. They're calling it a relay neuron. It's a simplified version, just like the diagram. So the interneuron sends messages up to the brain. So here's the muscle, here's the skin, goes around, but in between, so the interneuron and takes it up. So the signal okay, this is how the signal actually moves down a nerve. There's a thing called a voltage difference or a potential difference that exists between the inside and the outside of the cell. So we have a membrane potential, and all that means is there's a difference in electrical charge between the inside and the outside of the cell. And this is created by charged particles, ions usually, and there's an uneven distribution. So the ions we talk about are sodium, and notice Na is a symbol for sodium, short for natrium, and it's got a 1 positive charge. Potassium, K, it's kalium. Chloride, it's negative. Calcium, 2+. So these are there, and they're moving. There are channels in all the membranes, and they're moving backwards and forwards. And this leads to an uneven electrical charge. So we've got these. By the way, these ones with a positive and negative are they're called ions. They're not atoms. They're either lacking 1 or 2 electrons, or they have more than they normally have. So, for example, sodium and potassium have a positive charge, so they're lacking 1 electron each, whereas calcium's lacking 2, and chloride has got 1 extra. So, very basic chemistry lesson there. So, these ions, or charged atoms, I just might mention, they move in and out through very, very specific channels, and these channels are made of proteins. So they go from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell within the membrane. So these channels, they open and close depending on what it is that's doing it. So we have these neurotransmitters, okay, neuro, nerves, transmitters, molecules. So in response to these, you get a change in the potential. So the electric current on the inside compared to the outside of the nerve. So if there is a decrease, it's called a depolarization. I won't bother you too much with that one, but there's a difference in the voltage. And when the difference is there, it gets depolarized, and this depolarization sends an impulse, which is called an action potential, and that is what's measured. So if you're measuring a signal going down my leg, for example, you are measuring the action potential, and that's the impulse. So here's a little bit more complicated diagram. So the action potential, it only goes in one direction, always towards the axon tip. So the synapse, where the next, where there's a muscle or another nerve waiting. So here we have this bit in the middle is an axon.
Mhm.
You'll see here there's Na, sodium there. So when a signal is required, if you like, the sodium actually flows in. There's a signal and the sodium goes in and it changes the potential and it goes through, and then they come out there and they move, and the whole thing just moves along. Now, after the sodium has moved in and the potential there, to get the potential, you have to actually go to the next diagram. The potassium that's inside moves out. So there's a difference between them. It happens at every node of Ranvier. You get sodium in, potassium out. So there's a difference in this potential. And this is how it works. So one thing just occurred to me, I should say, that you should always have sufficient sodium and potassium in your diet. So don't hold back on the salt. Don't have too much salt. But, make sure there's enough of everything in balance in your diet. Anyway, you've got all this in the notes I sent. You can have another look. So here's a nerve cell, nodes of Ranvier between the along here, and he goes there, the end plates. So he goes from one nerve cell to the next nerve cell, and that moves that way there. At this point here, now this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. The axon terminal, it looks like a little bubble. These vesicles, which have the neurotransmitter in them, the neurotransmitter inside the vesicle is made up in the cell body, this bit here, and they travel down to the axon down here, that's terminal, and they collect there. So when a signal comes down, some of these are moved along here where it causes them to open, and the neurotransmitter, the molecule that you want to go to the next level, is released, and the receptors there then cause the next bit, well, this is this nerve here, to send a signal down the next nerve, or if it's a muscle, to contract, or whatever it is. So, but it only lasts a fraction of a second. So this seals up again, and there's a system of collecting these unused molecules, and we go back in there. A bit of a complicated system, but it works because we're here. Okay, here's another one, and I should mention that all of these movements require calcium to open the channels. So here's your axon. Here are the neurotransmitters inside the vesicles. They're what I call now the gap. There's an actual physical gap. Otherwise, the system wouldn't work. The gap is called the synapse, or the synaptic. What is it? Yeah, no, it's okay. The synaptic cleft. That's what it's called. It's we just call it the synapse. So this little indent here is representing one of these vesicles that have gone through. What the vesicle is made of, it's exactly the same material that the rest of the membrane is made of. So when it goes in there, it becomes part of the membrane, and then the neurotransmitter goes through these channels, and this is the next whatever it is there, and you get an action potential. That means another signal moving on. So it could be moving on to a muscle or to another nerve or whatever it might be. So here, this little thing on the bottom left here, this is a little section of this. So it goes from there, it goes into that body, cell body, and then moves down. You can see a little bit of the myelin sheath. Okay, so it's a little bit on the complicated side. And then, of course, all these here that haven't been used are reabsorbed here. So new, and then we're just sitting about, and particles are formed. So the whole thing is very, very, very busy. It's constantly on the move, constantly renewing itself. So,
can I ask you just about what the role, the calcium, what role has calcium got?
yeah. Without calcium, it wouldn't open up here. You need calcium to help open up the ion channels here, and this bit. Calcium.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So, the nervous system, we looked at this before. So we got here, we got a bit more of a knowledge of what than before we started. So the central nervous system, which is basically the brain and the spinal cord, it processes, interprets, stores information, issues orders to muscles, glands, and organs. And it consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So this is going backwards, right? The peripheral nervous system is everything that's not there. So the somatic nervous system, the soma refers to muscles and that sort of thing, the body itself. So the somatic system controls the skeletons, so the muscles attached to skeletons, and the autonomic refers to glands, which the autonomic usually produces. And then this is made up of two parts: the sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic. So the sympathetic moves our body. It gets moving for action, for doing something. For you, you wake up in the morning and you say, "Oh, I can't be bothered moving out of bed." It's okay. But then, something happens, the phone rings, or you need to go to the toilet, or say, "I'm hungry, I want to go have breakfast." To mobilize your body just to do something to get out of bed, this system does that. This system, parasympathetic, para just means parallel to, it conserves energy. It keeps you on an even keel. So this one mobilizes, this one suppresses, so that you get a balance between the two. Otherwise, we'd be on a high the whole time. So the central nervous system is a processing center. Okay, the brain and the spinal cord. And both of these, they're protected by 3 layers of membranes. And these are the meninges. You've heard of meningitis.
Mm.
So when the meninges somewhere in the system are infected, inflamed, it's meningitis. Now, the brain itself has no blood. Okay, a lot of blood goes towards the brain. The brain itself doesn't have blood. It's got, because, well, first of all, it's got a blood-brain barrier. Everyone knows that it's a BBB. It's a very special layer, and it really stops the toxic substances in the blood to get into the brain. But it allows nutrients, and it filters out harmful compounds from the brain back to the bloodstream. So it works. It works really well. We're here and we're working, so it works well. So this blood-brain barrier also is sort of, it's convoluted. So the blood vessels around the brain move into these convolutions, so they're very close. So oxygen, certain nutrients move from the blood into the brain. Waste products of the brain, it's living, of course, so it's producing gases and carbon dioxide and waste products. They move out into the blood, so it keeps it clean. But if you have a stroke or something like that, where you have a bleed, the bleed is outside the brain, but depending on how severe the bleed is, that section of the brain may not be receiving oxygen. Okay, and then you've got a problem. Now, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. And this is just a quick thing to show you where the spinal cord is in there. It's made up of 7 cervical vertebrae. So they're in the neck, the thoracics here, that's around the chest, the lumbar, that's the lower part, and your sacrum, and then the coccyx. The sacrum and the coccyx were basically in the lower part of that, animals with tails. These bits are a little bit longer, but we have the same. All animals have the same number, except I think it's the giraffe has got 2 extra cervical bones. They're long, they're very long. I think there's one animal that is a bit different. I can't remember exactly. So the brain, the most complex organ we have. I think we're pretty okay with that. Evolutionary wise, the oldest structures of the vertebrate brain regulates the essential automatic functions. So originally the brain was a tiny little thing, so it controlled the basics, and it's still there, still controlling the basics. But other parts, like intellect areas, grew. So this is the brain stem. So in there, before it gets to the cervical area inside there. Yeah. Okay. So that is called the reptilian brain. If you talk about the reptilian brain, you talk about the little bottom at the base. It's composed of 3 areas. So what do these 3 areas do? There's a thing called the medulla oblongata, and it controls our breathing, heart rate, blood vessel activities, swallowing, vomiting, digestion. All of them are important. And you're probably wondering, why would vomiting be important? I said, well, if you're a very early man and you're tasting something you had no idea what it was, and it was toxic, the body will probably get rid of it by vomiting. If you can't vomit, you're dead. That's where it would have started from. The pons is another area. It sort of supports the medulla, and the midbrain receives and integrates lots of our sensory information. So sight, hearing, they're the two main ones, but touch. And the touch, it's not only touch, it includes pain, includes temperature, general, but mostly sight and hearing. So what we got here? Here's your cerebrum. That's the outside of the brain. You have I just mentioned the names, corpus callosum, another layer here. And then we have ventricles as part of the cerebrospinal fluid, which goes down to the spinal cord. This is a cerebellum, and it's attached here by the brains. I've got a name, I can't think of it. Inside here is the thalamus. Here's the medulla, the pons, and the pituitary is here. The hypothalamus, here's the thalamus. The hypothalamus is under that, and the hypothalamus is our master gland, and it's about the size of a pea, made up of two parts, anterior and posterior, and controls a lot of things in us. So the hind, so you got here the midbrain, yeah, and then you got the hind brain, which is here, talk about here, the pons, the medulla. And don't forget, in us, we're vertical. All other animals are horizontal. So this bit is towards the back. And that's why it's called the hind brain. It's a brain at the back. Okay. So that's the pons, medulla, and cerebellum. That's these three here. And this cerebellum, it has an incredible function. It coordinates by error checking during motor, perceptual, cognitive, whatever you do. Motor is movement, perception is perception of our surroundings, cognitive is the thought. And it controls those functions, and it error checks. So if you want to do something, and I don't know, for some reason, part of the brain that says you want to do that, it gives you the wrong information or slightly wrong information, the cerebellum will repair that or fix it. So it's like a support agency. And it's involved in learning and remembering motor responses. So if you're an athlete or you're a gymnast or someone who uses the muscles to do specific things, this cerebellum looks after you. So it receives information about position of joints, the length of muscles, and also receives information from the auditory, hearing, and visual, the sight systems. So with us normal people, it does all that. But if you're something like a gymnast, doing gymnastics and flying and tumbling, imagine what that does to your ear, in the inner ear, and all that has to be controlled so you don't get vertigo, you don't start vomiting, you don't do anything. So again, the cerebellum looks at all this stuff, joints, muscles, all the other bits and pieces. So they're all under control. Now the hindbrain, those three we mentioned, they carry sensory information to the higher brain regions, and they carry motor, I should have highlighted that, motor instructions down. So they go through the brain regions and through the brain stem. So sensory information up, motor information instructions down. So the pons and the medulla are very, very important for conducting and sorting this information. And so, for example, the brain stem itself, that section, it coordinates large-scale body movements such as walking, running, whatever. It's controlling it. Make sure that you don't sort of trip or you don't do whatever that can go wrong. But finer motor skills like writing, painting, or typing is very different, a different area. So, so that these neurons from the forebrain and midbrain, this is fascinating. The forebrain and the midbrain, the neurons actually cross. So what's on the right side of the brain controls the left. And what's on the left side of the brain controls the right. And the midbrain is part of the CNS, the central nervous system. It's associated with vision, hearing, and motor control. If I want to pick up a pencil, I can pick it up, hold it still, I can write with it, I can draw with it, I can do all sorts of things with it, and I have full control. If there's a problem in the midbrain, you don't have that control. So you might see people doing things with their hands, but they have very little control of it. And that's from that section of the brain. The midbrain also controls our sleeping and waking cycles, the level of alertness that we have, and our temperature regulation. A busy area. Now, there are 12 cranial nerves. They are mostly inside the brain. And 2 of them originate from the midbrain. So the ocular motor and the trochlear nerves, they are responsible for the eye and eyelid movements. So to move your eye, whichever way you're doing, or even if you want to go cross-eyed for some reason, which you have to if you want to read up close, and the eyelids, they're all controlled by these 2 nerves, the 2 sections. And there are 3 layers in the midbrain. This is fascinating. So the one in the middle is called a substantia nigra. It's got a pigment in it. It's a dark pigment. Nigra means black. And because it's got melanin. Now, if you don't know what melanin is what's, if we give the color of our skin, for example, and ultraviolet exposure will produce more melanin to stop us getting cancer, and so we get a tan. Black people have a lot of melanin, white people have not much melanin, okay? But that's what, anyway, that's why I don't know why the substantia nigra has got those, but it probably goes back millions of years to original animals. So this layer of neurons here that make dopamine, which we mentioned earlier, it sends signals to coordinate our movements. Okay, so if we want to walk from here to the corner, no problem. Some people can't do that. They've got a problem. And this area is specifically damaged in Parkinson's disease. Now, the midbrain has a system of neurons called the reticular formation. And part of this reticular formation is called the reticular activating system. And that controls our sleep and our arousal. Now, I mean, when I go to bed at night, I close my eyes and I can't remember anything until I wake up. It could be 3 in the morning, you go to the toilet or whatever it is. The going to sleep bit, as soon as the light's out, I'm comfortable, I'm in my position, I remember nothing. And it's all controlled there. And then in the morning, when one wakes up, you may feel sleepy, but the arousal process comes from here. And eventually you feel wide awake, enough to get out of bed and get dressed and whatever else you have to do. So this reticular activating system acts as a sensory filter for reaching the cerebral cortex. So even if there's something going, if you leave the radio on, for example, next to the bed, the clock radio, after a while, you will not hear it. The system will stop that sensory information, and you just go to sleep with the radio on. I'm not saying you would do it, but if that happened, that's what would happen. So the more information reaching the cerebral cortex, the more alert and aware the person is. So when we're talking about arousal, it filters when you first wake up, and everything's normal and there's nothing untoward. More and more information will come in, and that'll wake you up slowly. If a car crashes into your car, a car crashes into your house or your fence, a big noise, you wake up in the morning, you wake up whenever it happens. You're wide awake. That's a different situation.
And Ruben, and what, for instance, people who cannot sleep, like I don't sleep well, like how can you rectify it? What's happening, in the brain?
A very good question, and I can't answer that.
Okay. Is that
Yeah, I really don't. I don't know enough. I know the basics. My background is research, not medicine, and
right. They talk about melatonin, but I'm not
melatonin.
sure.
That's right. Good.
Yeah.
Do you take melatonin?
No, because I'm worried that I might sleep in the mornings. Like won't wake up. I don't know.
Well, take a smaller dose. The basic is to get to sleep. Once you sleep, you'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know how long the melatonin stays as melatonin because it gets broken down.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay. Just as one gets older, it looks like one gets less sleep. It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'd say I didn't do medicine. All my university education was in research.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I became a teacher.
Oh, wow.
Because I got bored with the research. Once I went out to work, I wasn't happy. I was on my own a lot. I like people. I like to talk to people. And I knew that I found out that I can teach. So I went to teaching. And after 35 years, I'm at school. I'm teaching.
Excellent. That's so good. Very lucky. Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, there are other areas in the brain which regulate sleep and wakefulness. I mentioned that. Serotonin, you've probably heard of that one. It's a very important hormone that stabilizes our mood. If we feel well, if we feel happy, and it impacts the whole body. Serotonin just, and you can take it. I think it's tablet form. So serotonin enables the brain cells to communicate with each other. If there's an issue, when you've got a problem of some sort, they'll give you that. It helps with sleeping, eating, digestion. You've got to ask your doctor about that, Helena.
Yeah. Okay. Serotonin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another really good thing, when we were kids, I don't know, you were given warm milk before you sleep.
That's right.
Because the milk, in the milk, got tryptophan. It's one of the amino acids. And that the warm milk induces sleep because tryptophan is what serotonin is made of. Body.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't like dairy, so
that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't like milk on its own.
No.
I'll have it as a latte, but
okay, that's right.
Then we have another very important part called the thalamus. You've heard of the hypothalamus, which is really tiny, the size of a pea I mentioned. The thalamus is much bigger and it's above it, just a bit of. It's the main center of sensory information. That we get. And also the main output for motor information leaving the cerebrum. So whatever motor thing that's happening from the subconscious, like our diaphragm, for example, and the ribs. I don't know if you know, the ribs move. It's all muscle outside the bone, and it moves the cage up and down, so it increases the volume and decreases the volume, and the diaphragm moves down. So that sort of thing, it's called motor situation. Things that move. The incoming information into the thalamus into the brain is sorted out in the thalamus. Okay, it's in the middle, just above the half thalamus, and then it sorts out the information and sends it to the areas of the brain that have to deal with that piece of information. So it also receives information from the cerebrum and other parts of the brain to regulate emotion and arousal. So this thalamus is just so important, like every other part, that it sort of it's a controlling center. It's sort of information is coming in from the outside and information coming into it from the inside, and it just sorts everything out. Then the hypothalamus, which I mentioned a few times, it's tiny, and it's it's a homeostatic regulation center. Now, homeostasis is a situation where the body is under control, but things are not static, but they're the same. Homo is the same status. So we're here for a couple of hours, an hour and a half, whatever it might be. Our temperature, our alertness, many other things. We have homeostasis, our blood pressure, our sugar, our blood sugar levels, whatever that we are of these period of time that we're together is controlled. And it's controlled very nicely by the hypothalamus, which produces hormones to control whatever has to be controlled. It's the master gland in a way. So it contains the body's thermostat. It measures our body temperature, blood temperature. It controls and regulates hunger and thirst. It's also the pleasure center. And it's very important because if your hypothalamus wasn't working properly, sex and mating behaviors in us or animals just wouldn't happen. It's all part of the pleasure bit, but it's not only the pleasure bit, it's the essential for reproductive activity for species to keep moving along, but also the fight or flight response where adrenaline is produced and in the adrenal gland. So, for example, if I don't know, if you're walking down the street and someone starts acting very aggressively towards you, you will feel very, very quickly inside you this terrible knotted feeling. The hypothalamus will send a very quick message to the adrenal glands. They will produce adrenaline, and you will be wide awake like it's never been before. And your eyes, the pupils will open, your hearing will be better, stronger, and all your muscles are getting more blood sent to them. And it's called the fight or flight response. Whatever the situation is, it's the same response. And so you either have to fight, and I'm not talking necessarily about humans, could be any animal, or you run, if you can. So everything is regulated in us to such a fine degree. And then when something happens, you can, like a bombshell inside will go off and be ready to protect ourselves some way. The hypothalamus is also very important in circadian rhythms. Now, it's also called a biological clock. The word circadian, circa in Latin, means approximately, and dian means day. So it's a cycle of a day, and different things happen at different times of the day. And so us animals, we all have regular, repeated, rhythmic behaviors. So we have a sleep-wake cycle. We have a body temperature cycle. Our temperature changes during the day, and it's controlled. Our blood pressure cycle, our menstrual cycles, sex drive cycles, and not just in us, but all animals. So this is a generalized circadian rhythm cycle in people, and it's a clock. So midnight. So well, let's go back one little bit. At 9 o'clock, the brain starts to produce melatonin, and that makes you feel sleepy. Whether it's 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock, it's an approximation. By a few hours later, you're in your deepest of deep sleeps. By 4 o'clock, you're at your lowest body temperature. Your body temperature just drops. You're comfortable. You're covered. You're in a bed that's comfortable. You're fast asleep. Your temperature is really low. A couple of hours later, the blood pressure starts to rise, but sharpest blood pressure rise means the quickest one. And then shortly after that, melatonin secretion stops. So melatonin secretion starts means you're starting to feel drowsy. Here, you will stop feeling drowsy. So by 10 o'clock in the morning, you're at your highest alertness. Okay. Then 2:30 comes along, your best coordination for the day is there. Your fastest reaction time at 3:30. The greatest cardio at 5 o'clock. cardiovascular efficiency, and muscle strength. 5 in the afternoon. This is an approximation. The highest blood pressure for the day would be at 6:30. Of course, this will vary from person to person, from animal to animal, but there's a cycle. A highest body temperature, about 7. About 9, melatonin starts to secrete and to be produced and secreted so that you start feeling sleepy. Whether sometimes you feel really wide awake, but it will start there somewhere.
And Ruben, what happens if the cycle is disrupted by jet lag or other things?
You've got a problem.
Well, it takes a while to get back.
It takes a while to get back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem is when you're flying, crossing a number of date lines. No, not date lines, what are they called? Time
zones.
Which?
Time zones.
Time zones. Thank you. Yeah,
Look.
you're missing some time zones. Now, also in the hypothalamus, we have daily rhythms and we have seasonal rhythms. So we are feeding 3 times a day, most of us. We sleep, we have a rhythm. Now, animals have reproductive cycles.
Yep.
There are migration cycles, hibernation cycles. So with most animals, the reproductive cycle is in the female. It's the female when she's ready to receive a male. This happens in humans as well. She will produce certain hormones. Or she'll have all sorts of other okay, I just got a message here. So you've got, for example, insects, moths. I'll give you an example. You always know a male moth from a female moth. The male moth has got 2 antennae, but they're feathery. They look like feathers. The female, which is ready to reproduce, the eggs are ready, will stick a little bum up in the air and squirt out a few drops of very potent hormone, which the male picks up with his very special antennae, and he follows a concentration gradient. So he follows it, but he's not the only one, because it's out in the air. So other moths of that particular species, it has to be that species, will follow, and then the female will, I don't know whether she takes on first come, first served, or the males have it out somehow, I don't know. But anyway, so it's a female that gets the male excited hormonally. Humans also do that by releasing certain hormones through the skin, but that's another story. Okay, the cerebrum is, that's big area, is the most highly developed structure of our brain. And it's, so the left and the right, they're called hemispheres, half spheres, and that each of them has 3 layers. It's got a gray matter, which is the outer layer. It's also the cortex. The cortex anywhere means the outside layer. So you've got the adrenal gland, you've got the outside layer called the cortex, the inside called the medulla. So that's a standard biological term. Then under the gray matter is the white matter, and then you've got a cluster of the nuclei called basal nuclei. That's deep inside the white matter. So the 3 layers. And the basal nuclei, that's these ones deep inside, they are involved in planning and learning movement sequences. So if you're a dancer or a gymnast or something doing things, that is what you rely on, this area. This is a learning process. Damage in this area, devastating, saying things like Parkinson's we mentioned before, but also Huntington's disease. And damage could also cause a person passive and immobile, to be passive or immobile, because motor impulses no longer are sent to the muscles. So the brain formulates what it needs to do and then sends it to the muscle. It must still be formulating, but not sending it to the muscle until the muscle doesn't do anything. And this cortex is the largest and most complex part of our brain. And it's the part that changed the most during our evolution, vertebrate evolution. That means animals with backbones. And mammals have an additional layer. This is for like all animals, and then only mammals have this thing called the neocortex. Neo means new. Okay. We mammals were the last of the animals in the evolutionary process. So this neocortex, excuse me, allows greater cognition abilities. Cognition is intelligence, intellect, and our sophisticated behaviors. How many other animals, have schools and universities, or or can paint or design rockets to go to the moon? But it also applies to animals other than us. And these huge changes, due to the relative size of the cortex, and they have these convolutions. So these movements, and that increases the surface area of the neocortex. I've got some pictures coming up. So this neocortex is less than 5 millimeters thick, has a surface area half a square meter, and it accounts for about 80% of the total mass of the brain. Okay. That's why our head is so big. So like the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex is divided to left and right, and it's responsible for opposite sides of the body. So the communication between these two is done where they cross over. There's a thing called the corpus callosum. It's a large body. It's a thick band of white matter. Okay, so now the brain itself has got, this is the cerebral cortex. And all these convolutions increases the surface area. So you have more space to do things. So you've got the frontal, temporal, occipital, and parietal. So this is the frontal lobe. There are all these areas here that thinking, executive functions, high-level functions. That's the executive function. Thinking, planning, organizing, problem solving, emotions, behavioral control, personality. Really the high-level stuff. The motor cortex controls our movement. The sensory cortex, our sensations, all the senses. The parietal lobe, it gives us perception. It allows us to work out what's around us by looking and putting it all together. And arithmetic and spelling are involved there. The occipital at the back is where the vision is. And the temporal lobe, memory, and us understanding language. And the beauty of that is, if you speak more than one language, you don't mix the words up. I speak Hungarian. My aunt preferred that. That's my first language. And I will speak in Hungarian. But because I never had education in Hungarian, I don't know the language that well. She and I had developed a language called Hunglish, where we spoke Hungarian with English words put in. So, but it's controlled. That if you speak French and German and Italian, and you speak to someone and you know the language well, you don't mix the words up. So this area is very, very important. Now, this is called a homunculus. It's a version of a human. Okay, face, hands. Usually, the homunculus also shows parts of the body, different sizes. So it refers to the sensitivity of touch. So the lips are very large, and the fingers, for example, but the head isn't. The hand is. Okay, there are other homunculuses, but what this does is this is just a drawing showing what parts of the body are controlled in what part of the brain. So motor means the movement of something. The somatosensory means the sensation, the touch, the feeling of. So if you see a sensory of the eyes, the smell, touch, and so on. If you've got time, I think I put that into the notes. Have a close look at it. Very interesting. There's much more here. Again, I won't spend. This is. I've gone through all the vocabulary with you, and this is different. By the way, superior view and inferior view. The superior is from the top, inferior looking up at the brain. So this is the bottom of the brain at the top of the brain, and the lateral views is from the side. The sagittal view, this one here, when you cut it in half, that's what you see. So I realize it's I've gone a bit longer than I expected, but let's go a little bit further. So neuroplasticity is when you get new structures and functional changes in the brain as a result of new experiences. So, for example, if you decide to take a painting at any time in your life, you've never done it before, those new skills are allowed to now the brain through neuroplasticity will allow those skills to become ingrained in your head, because even though your brain might be 70 years old or more or a bit less, you can still learn things. If you want to learn a language, it'll allow you to do that. It's a new skill, and that's called neuroplasticity. So the brain can rewire itself, and it reorganizes things. And this bit is about brain damage. So if you have something that happened in the, you get a bit of a bleed or something, and it kills a bit, it will it'll try to organize what it does with new connections, with new neural pathways, and that's amazing. And occurs mainly through sprouting and rerouting. So sprouting is developing new neurons, new nerve cells, and rerouting is finding ways around the damaged area. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen. So, so this is just rerouting. Is if there's a problem here, Okay. If that dies for some reason, that nerve, then the messages go down the other end. And sprouting, if say the green one here dies, new nerve connections will be made to this other one, if that makes sense. The peripheral nervous system, this is so far we've only talked about what's going on in the brain. The peripheral bits is the somatic and the autonomic. So these are voluntary and involuntary situations. And the sympathetic is basically fight or flight, protection. Parasympathetic system is rest or digest. So if you've eaten, you sit and digest. And this is a very interesting diagram. It shows where different parts of the body are regulated from. So all of these, with the intestine, so we've got the lungs, the saliva, slowing the heart down, production of bile, stimulating stomach juices to be produced, muscle relaxation, and so on. They're all controlled in this little bit in the brain, in the lower brain. These causes of an erection, for example, and also in the female, down right down the bottom, and all these at different levels of the spinal cord. So this maintains homeostasis, a level homeostasis, the same status, right through, and this mobilizes reserves under stress. When you're stressed, increased heart rate, you breathe faster, less blood goes to your intestines and more to the muscles and so on. And just bleeding. So the autonomic peripheral nervous system, the two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic and sympathetic. And so the sympathetic is connected to the internal organs through from the brain by spinal nerves. And when stimulated, they prepare the organism for stress.
Ruben,
Yep.
sorry, I have to drop off now.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's all right, Preeti. I'll get these up. You can see the end of it later.
No worries. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
My
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Bye-bye. The parasympathetic, the bodily functions when a body is at rest, like digestion, metabolism, and so on, body relaxing. Oh, now what's happening? Oh, that's the last one. 57 out of 57. So, okay. Right, so well, thank you for putting up with that. It was quite a long session, and
But very interesting. It was
I
good.
hope you got something.
Very interesting.
It shows how complex,
Mm.
not us only, but living things are, and how we maintain our complexity, but still move, live in a nice, comfortable way.
Yep.
So we're not hassled. So I mean, if you walk down the park, the Princess Park where I'm near, and in the afternoon, huge numbers of dogs, and you watch them. Some of them are very quiet. Others will play with others, and some of them get angry. So all these emotions are in other animals as well. But anyway, so I will see you in a fortnight. I think we're going off to Canberra, but I can't remember whether it's in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So we'll let you know in the fullness of time. Just away for a week, but I can't remember which week it is. So we want to do a bit of travel while we still can.
Enjoy.
Good idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice.
I wish everybody
Anyway,
well over the
I will
fast for
keep you-
Monday.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ruben.
Yes,
Keep
Well,
well.
and by the way, Shana Tova,
and I forgot to.
Well over the fast.
You too.
well over
Thank
the
you.
past. Yes.
Bye-bye.
That's-
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, Ruben.
Bye for now. Thanks.